Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our workshop, February 1st, 2021. Before we begin the work of the district, let us stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I understand we have one public input. Is it in person or virtual?
It is online, and Mr. Ward is managing that for us this morning, so we'll ask him to let the individual in.
Good morning, board members. I do not see this person's name up here. I do have a David, Florida student, Power, as a guest. I'm not sure if that's who the person is or not. Would you like for me to let them in?
That is the individual, yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll let them in now.
Last name? Okay, you're connected, but you're on mute, David. So, David, if you'll give us your name and your address, and then you have 3 minutes. And you're on mute again.
I'm sorry, I keep being muted. My name is David Caicedo, 134 East Colonial Drive, Orlando, Florida, 32801. So does my time start now?
It starts now.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You bet.
So my name is David Caicedo. I'm the co-director of the Florida Student Power Network. And I'm here in response to the incident that happened at Eustis High School, where an SRO brutally attacked and then tased a young Black student on last week, Wednesday. As the co-director of the Florida Student Power Network, I just want to say that those actions are completely 100% irresponsible, unacceptable, and disappointing. To see that someone who is supposedly tasked with the safety of the students to have such disregard for the life of a child is absolutely tragic. And as the Florida Student Power Network, we actually did release a statement that I will be sending directly to all of the members of this body. And we had a couple of demands, right? And it was in response of actually both this incident and the incident in Osceola. So the first demand is one, for the SRO to immediately be prohibited from being involved in, from being able to be inside of any kind of school near any student involved in the incident, or be near any student in the future or in the present, and to be fired. Like for that SRO to immediately be fired and not be allowed to work in any school. We demand a full investigation of the officer involved in the incident, and all school resource officers with a history of violence, mental health concerns, or any unresolved complaints to just be investigated. We call on state legislators, right, and this body also to look into the role of SROs in their schools. And that's for the state, so not for you all. The next demand would be for school boards to reallocate, for this body to reallocate resources into school counselors, social workers, student support spaces, classroom, COVID safety preparation, and away from police in schools. Clearly, they are not serving our students. Then another demand that we have is that the safety and healing of all of the students involved and the student that actually saw students that experienced violence against one of their peers to be prioritized. Then we also say that no student be punished either criminally or from the school in relationship to these incidents. The student that was tased, the students that recorded, students that experienced that trauma with them, right? That none of them be punished. And the last demand that we have immediately is also for students' right to protest to be respected. We saw, and we're coming up on the anniversary of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas tragedy, where students attempted to walk out for that, and the principals and school boards actually extremely prohibited them to
David,
do
your
that.
3 minutes is up. If you can conclude, that'd be great.
Okay, so, well, those are some of the demands. Just wanted to say, I will be sending these in writing also to this body. We have lots of folks with us. We represent thousands of students across the state of Florida, many of them who live in Eustis, in Tavares, and other parts of Lake County. And we are here for their safety first and would like to see these demands be met.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, well, we are now headed into our agenda for this morning, and we're going to begin with an overview by Dr. Feltner and Katie Pearson in regards to our equity work, and so I'm excited to welcome them here this morning, and so sit back. I know I've had a chance to kind of preview this presentation. I can tell you I'm very excited about what you're going to see and experience today, so I'll turn it over to you all.
Good morning. I'm just going to ask that our tech people go ahead and put our slides on the screen, and so we can get started. So good morning, Chairman Mathias and board members and Superintendent Cornegie. I want to thank you first for the opportunity for myself and Mrs. Pearson to share with you kind of our journey that we've been on with eliminating disparities in Lake County. I want to warn you, today might look a little different. So we're going to share some information, but we're also going to ask that you participate in some opportunities to learn with us. And it's the same kind of opportunities that we've shared with leaders, equity coalitions, and some of our teachers. And so I'm hoping that you'll get to sort of assimilate those experiences with us, as well as maybe learn a little bit more about the work that we're doing with equity. So if you'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. So I just want to ground our work today by beginning with our vision and our mission, and which we've had for a long time, I think at least over 10 years from what I can see, and to remind us that we have already publicly committed to striving for a learning community that ensures that every student will graduate with skills needed to succeed, and every student will excel. That mission and vision statement that highlights every student in red communicates that we've been aligning our work to equity for many years here in Lake County. Go ahead and next. So all great conversations begin and are grounded in data. So I just want to remind you, that's where we'll start today. I would like to help you just make sure that we're all aware of the racial makeup of the students we serve. About 49% of our students are white, 26.9% are Hispanic or Latino, 15.5% are Black or African American, 4.1% are multiracial, 2.7% are Asian, 0.5% are American Indian, and a little over 1% did not complete the racial section of the registration form when enrolling in our district. So I just want to give you a picture of all those that we serve here in Lake County. Next slide. So as we connect much of the work that's been happening in the past 4 years under the superintendent's leadership, I want to share a piece of data that demonstrates that we are seeing improvement towards eliminating the gap with graduation rates, which demonstrates that this is not new work. The graph on the left shows the graduation rates for the last 4 years with our largest subgroups, white, Black, African American, and Hispanic and Latino. Each subgroup shows an upward trend, as we are already aware. But what is newsworthy is the space between the lines decreasing over time. This shows that as a system, we're eliminating disparities when it comes to ensuring that all students leave our system with a high school diploma. The chart on the right shows the same information at the state level. And as you can also see, the space between the lines is slightly larger than it is in Lake County. Because we know eliminating the achievement gap is a national, state, and local responsibility, this comparison allows us to determine the rate at which we are making a difference. I do just want to pause here and kind of let you take a look at that. I think one of the things that to really highlight is that you can see that our Hispanic and Latino subgroup actually is the highest subgroup for graduation rates. When I think about some of the supports that we have in place, not saying that all of those students may have come in as ELL students, but in thinking about that some of them probably did enter our system as second language learners, we have to consider the fact that we already have many supports in place for those students. And so when I think about continuing to narrow the space in between, it makes me think about that we should replicate some of those systems, with other subgroups. So as we continue to do this work, that's the kind of things that we're looking at as we think about this. So as we shared with the graduation rate data, I just want you to know that we've been working a while on this. We've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of training. These are some of the anchor texts that we've used over the past 3 years that allow us to continue our trajectory while embedding equity as a focus in our current work. We know that in leading learning organizations that it's the adult learners and they learn at the same level that students learn. And so I think you can see that we put a lot of time in honing our own skills and how to lead all students. So while we are seeing some progress, we also know that our work in eliminating the achievement gap is only just beginning. This summer, during our work with Dr. Anthony Muhammad, we established a common understanding of the definition of an achievement gap, and you see it here on the screen. I'll give you a second to kind of preview that. So as we continue to dig deep into data, we do have some gaps that still exist. They exist in academic achievement, they exist in discipline, they exist in access to AP, they exist still in our graduation rates, and they exist in ESE. So I'm going to allow us to sort of look at some data, and I'm going to allow Ms. Pearson, I'm going to kind of tag team today, and so we're going to go back and forth. I'm going to allow Katie to kind of talk a little bit about what this chart means. You have an extra handout beside you as well that has this data chart blown up, so it might be easier for you to take a look at. We're going to spend some time here.
Good morning. So,
I think someone needs to mute their mic.
Dr. Burns.
good morning. The chart that you have before you is the same information that we've been looking at over the summer, as well as with our leaders this year. We decided that we needed to dig deeper into our data. And so this chart represents a better view of some of the things that have led to our achievement gap. So we utilized our data to look at the gaps relative to our subgroup demographics. So to orient you to the chart, the blue totals are the same totals Dr. Feltner read earlier with regard to our district demographic makeup, with regard to program, gender, and race. And along the side, along the left side, we see different elements or descriptors based on that data draw. In the gray, these are the actual FSA scores with regard to students as they fell on the 18-19 report. Underneath, where you see the areas that are in red, these are red highlights that would indicate what we call disproportionality relative to the actual makeup of the demographic in our district. So if you would look at males and females, males make up about 51%, females 49%. We would like to see that same representation in all of our data so that we would mirror what our actual population would be within about plus or minus 3 to 5 percentage points. So anything that we highlight doesn't mirror that particular subgroup demographic within 3 to 5 percentage points. Actually, 3 is what we used. And so that would mean that those highlights show that there is a disparity. If we have multiple highlights within the same subgroup, looking at the subgroup going down, that would mean that we have a disparity with regard to the subgroup. When we have a highlight going across, then we're looking at that descriptor and saying there's a disparity within that descriptor. So, for example, black students, male students, we have a striking disparity, a lot of red highlights, as well as with our ESC population. So we should ask ourselves, what is it about our system that causes these subgroups to consistently underachieve or be over-identified? How can we make our system more equitable for these groups without creating the same disproportionality among the other groups? So how do we even this out in terms of supporting the disparities that we see highlighted? So I'll give you a few minutes just to kind of orient yourselves to the data as well as you look. Some of our descriptors you'll see have multiple red lines, as well as with regard to the subgroup. Some of the noticings that we saw were multiple subgroups being over-identified for remedial courses, and this is the data that we use to have more conversation around why this might be occurring, what is it about our system that creates some of these inequities, and where might we need to focus.
Ms. Pearson,
Yes.
you said they were overrepresented like in remedial courses, correct?
Yeah, so when we look at remedial courses, there are some subgroups that are overrepresented in remedial
Right.
courses and underrepresented in our AP honors or advanced courses.
So I guess maybe we're getting to that. I don't want to like jump the story, but like, wouldn't remedial in theory help those people, those kids get to a higher level so that then they might get towards those higher courses? Or do we need to start earlier?
Well, some of what we discussed has to do with maybe, that's the conversations that we had. So we're not saying that remedial courses are not good supports for students. But as we talked as leaders, some of the things that came up were, how do we select students for remedial courses? And does that maybe create in some way, shape, or form an idea that they are underperforming? And do we keep that idea that they're underperforming instead of maybe focusing more on how do we accelerate while we're remediating to ensure our students are making progress and caught up? How long they may stay in remedial courses we discussed, and what are some ways to accelerate that learning so that we don't see over-identification across the board with regard to certain student demographics. So it's not to say remedial courses are bad, it's just how do we ensure that we have equity across when we're looking at students in remedial courses and ensuring that students can possibly earn their way out at a more exponential
As
rate.
opposed to back in the day, it was more of there was the lower track, the middle track, and the
Right.
higher track. Okay, so we're trying to get away from that, basically.
And I think we have, but at the same token, if we don't look at our data in multiple forms, we might fall into a different way of tracking that we weren't necessarily, that we didn't necessarily know was going on. So this is about looking at data in a different way. Many times we look at just our FSA data. We now have, we're going to be held accountable for our subgroups, similar to where we went back to AYP with now our ESSA subgroups are part of the way schools will be graded. So it begged that we needed to continue to look at subgroups in multiple ways, and not just across the FSA indicator, but all of our other indicators. Our work with Dr. Mohammed this summer also helped to say, if we want to create a truly equitable system, we have to be willing to look at equity across the board from multiple indicators and multiple elements and have conversation. Because where we yield our FSA scores also comes from our programmatic descriptors and the elements that we have and how we focus on moving students through our system. So for instance, when we see our black subgroup, our male subgroup, we see that within our system, there are some things that we want to focus on, we want to work better on, but also not create that same disproportionality for other groups as we continue. So anything that the board notices with regard to the data, or has any other questions before I move?
Well, I've got a question looking at the percentage of the level 3 data. This is really 3rd through 10th grade, right? So, do you also have it broken down? I'd be interested in seeing how that trends from year to year, or is there a higher percentage of students scoring at level 3 in the earlier years of elementary, and then that number drops off in the later years to end up with this number? Or does it really kind of hold consistent from year to year, across the grade levels? Do you know, are you able to?
Yeah, by
Speak to that at all?
subgroup, we've seen growth in our subgroups because our data has increased when it comes to FSA. So we have seen the growth, but what happens is the gap stays the same. So we see the growth moving, but the gap is not closing. So when we take a look at those pieces, we want to say, why isn't the gap closing? And that's why we broke out the others. Does that answer your question, or?
Sort of. Well, I mean, that gives me some other useful information, but really, I was kind of thinking of. So let's use the ELA just as an example here. 37% of our black students are getting level 3 or above across the district, and I guess I'm interested in looking at that 37%. How does that fall from year to year? Like in third grade, is it 20%, and 10th grade is 40%? Or is it the other way? 40. I guess I'm wondering, are students declining over time, or are they, from grade to grade? That's the kind of piece I'm wondering. Or does it hold kind of steady?
Thanks for all your help, Mark.
We can, go ahead.
I think that's exactly the kind of questions that this data brings out, right? So while we don't have that, I can't
Right.
post it today, but those are the exact conversations that came out with leaders. Like, you want to know more, right?
That's right.
So I know this at the district level, but what about my school? But what about my third grade? What happens at sixth grade? What happens at ninth grade? Like,
Right.
where is the bigger disparities? And
That's
so, so now I'm like, I want to know too, right? So those are the kinds of questions that lead to the work. And then because at a district level, we have this bird's eye view, but then to really hone down to what does that mean for me, for my grade level, for my students, and that's where we go to leaders, to teachers, and so
Right.
that's a great wondering.
Right, because then you start to think about regionally. Is or do we have from school to school? I think as you dive in deeper, then that allows you to more fine tune where to target your energies and resources, right?
And if you look at suspensions, I mean, when you read the data, the categories below the FSA, these are students that make up that group. So out of all the students that were suspended at least one day, 33% were ESE, 2% were ELL, 71% were male, 29%. So this is of the students that make up the subgroup, except for at the top with FSA, that is actual FSA score. So we wanted to make sure if we pull out from a broader view, we know that our suspension data has decreased overall, right? But when we look at the students that were actually suspended, this would be the demographic of how it was pulled out based on subgroup, and does it mirror our actual district. So that helps to kind of give you an idea of how this data is pulled. It's of that group. So of the group that make up advanced placement, honors, AP, and ACE, this is how it looks, right?
So just to add on to what Ms. Pearson's saying, the suspensions, what that led to was it led to leaders, when we brought this to leaders, it led them to think about, some of the leaders have gone back and pulled all of their referrals for suspensions, and then looked at what was the offense, and then who was getting them, and then what was the subgroup. They're actually digging into every single, I'm gonna go back and look at every single referral, and are we over disciplining some subgroups that we shouldn't be, or what's the, and they're starting to do some work with that, with teachers and with their coalition groups, and having some conversations about that.
Can I ask a question about the remedial courses? So even though that our white students didn't make the red, 40% are in remedial courses? We can't be terribly proud of that, right? So what are we doing as an overall? When this data comes out, even though you see some areas jump out, there's also concern.
It's not 40% of white students are in remedial courses. It's of all the students that are enrolled in remedial courses, 40% of those are whites. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but that's disturbing also.
Well, not when 57% are male, and You know what I mean? So,
I think there's a shift in how you read this data that I think takes a moment to connect.
Right.
Because so that I guess the part that's not grayed at the top, right? So all the other stuff, the white and pink, from the column labeled B to U, that should total 100%, right? Because that shows you what percentage of all the students are enrolled in advanced honors AP or ACE courses. That one, right? That should total 100%, give or take, because of rounding. And so of that pot of students, 11% of them are black, 4% of them are Asian, right? A is Asian on here, is that right?
Does that?
So that doesn't necessarily mean that 11% of the black students are in there, just of that group.
Of that pot. I
Of
get it.
that pot. Right. So
24% of that pot.
So these will never all be zeros.
I know, but you've got 40% of white kids in that pot that are in
But
remedial.
49% of the district is white. So on average,
I
there
understand
are
what they're trying to say as far as that number, but I'm saying just on its raw, the number of kids in there, that we should be looking, in my opinion, at the 40% as well. That's a pretty high number.
Would it be accurate to say we wanted like the total number? So 40% of what? 40% of 20 wouldn't be a significant amount, right? But if it was 40% of 2,000, then you're talking about a bigger population of students. So to know that,
Well,
to
how
know
many
40%
kids
of
are we
what-
talking about in total?
We don't, right. That's, each of those columns is a
so
different number.
I think you have to keep in mind that when you're just looking at this data at first glance, it doesn't really matter. Because if we want every single kid, it doesn't matter if there's an overrepresentation in remedial courses.
Right.
So when you look, if there's 100 kids in it, you're right, 43 of them are white, 20, but we have 49% that represent everybody. But there's an over-identification of boys for sure. Like, why are there a lot of boys in remedial courses? It's just an interesting question, right? So,
Oh, I can
when we
tell you.
have the numbers,
I was going to say, I can tell you some reasons.
As a boy that was in high school, I can tell you why. I would have been in there.
and that was a great one that came up for us as well, because it is true that when you walk our classrooms, you will notice that the kids in advanced and honors and AP, the majority of them are white girls. And it begs the thing about, do they do school better, right? Are they more compliant? So it begs us, how do you get into advanced classes? How do you get into a remedial class? A remedial class takes one test score. It takes intensive reading, which is where the majority of our students are in remedial courses, takes one test score to get in. One bad day,
So are we changing? So that's my question. Like, that's why I'm just listening to all your questions. My question is, what have we done about? So I know we're looking at the data and we're driving, but like, what are we talking about that it's hard for my second grader to sit still in a classroom for
Right.
6 hours? And why does it take one test score to get into a remedial course? And so those are the things
and
that
then
we're going to talk
freeing
about.
up some of the opportunities to get into advanced,
Right.
right? Like what, so if teacher recommendation is a part of that, and we've gotten away from that, but you'll see it a little bit in like elementary to junior high still.
Yeah,
We don't see it as much in high school, but we do see it in this whole sixth grade math track, that there's still a piece that the teachers talk about who should be placed there, right? So how do we talk to all schools and all teachers about, like, let's really look at how the kid's performing, maybe not how they're behaving, and then what can they do and what can't they do? Do we have multiple measures versus just an FSA score or just one test score? And those are the types of conversations that we're having. And I do know, and there's a slide to remind us of this at the end, I know you want action fast, but we just looked at this data in November.
Yeah.
We've lived through Christmas. So to expect like answers and changes system and processes in a month or two, really, all of January, we just ended January, is really the month that we had, is a big ask, and a issue that's been happening for hundreds of years. So while we're taking action, this is the place to start, is to asking those questions, and then what do we do about our systems and policies?
And we're having this conversation, I know, with the principals, you guys have said that, but are we sitting with teachers and showing them their like class data as well? Like where they can kind of have some, I feel like, and this was speaking for me personally, but until somebody put the data in front of me, I thought I was doing a pretty good job, is what I would tell you. Like, yes, I'm teaching well. And then when you see the real numbers, it makes you really say, okay, there is a disparity. I'm not doing what I need to do for my boys, or I'm not meeting the needs of my ESOL students. And so we're getting to that point where we can.
Yes.
Okay.
Further in our presentation, we have some leaders that are going to share with you what they're doing.
Cool.
And so in looking at this, the main thing is we see a different experience for male students and female students in our district, right? We see a different experience for Black students and other subgroups of students. So what does that mean in terms of what we should be focusing in on, what we should be dialoguing about, and how do we ensure that we have the appropriate support to do that. So our next slide.
Can I ask, before we move on real quick, you said it just takes one test score to get in remedial courses. Do parents, traditionally have a say?
They do. Intensive reading wise, they can choose to opt out of that by kind of signing a letter that says that they don't have to go into intensive reading. So a level 1 places you in intensive reading. We offer it to level 1s and many level 2 students as long as we have room. And I'm not saying intensive reading is not a good support. Like we're working on how do we increase the knowledge and skills of intensive reading teachers, all ELA teachers, but it is true that it automatically flags you for an intensive reading class versus by law it does, by state statute it does. And so how do we sort of think about that as a system? How can we add more supports? And the other pieces that were in remedial classes were intensive math, which we have at a few places, and then liberal arts math tends to be one of our courses that we offer also. So we do have schools working with what are the best scheduling for those courses? How do we partner with those courses? Looking at ways to bring supports. And Dr. Muhammad talked a lot about that this summer, about how do we accelerate that learning while giving kids a support. Even partnering with AP classes. What does a support class look like for that? So doing some of that work.
Okay. Can we get our slides back? Yeah, okay. Next slide, please. So in looking at that, digging deeper and seeing those disparities at a different level, we work to become a better system. We want to ensure that we're supporting all students, that we don't have that predictable data outcome, and that we have urgency around the steps that we need to take to become better at learning what we need to do to close those gaps. So we created a equity commitment, and we use the word commitment because to us it speaks about passion, it speaks about teamwork, it speaks about determination. Some use policy, but that conveys compliance. And we really want to ensure that we are all committed. And so as leaders, we focused on this commitment of eliminating those disparities that you saw with regard to those subgroups and no longer having predictable data in any of these categories. So we welcomed that this year. Next slide. We also have had each year with leaders, leadership expectations, and through learning walks and other work, these 6 leadership expectations have been things that we've worked with leaders on and we've also committed to. This year we added a 7th, and that 7th was to implement an equity coalition to address the achievement gaps so that leaders could have on campus their own team or equity coalition based on what we began in the summer, the data that we've been looking at, and pulling in others on their campus to really do this work and do it together. Next slide. Our equity commitment is really honing in on looking at things through an equity lens. So we have had approaches that we have been working on. We did not want equity to be this new thing. Now we're working on equity. No, we're looking at all of the things that we currently do, and we're saying, how do we ensure that we use an equity lens as we interpret that? So the intent was not to create anything new or a new program. The intent was to instead make sure that we're evaluating and refining our current programs, our decisions, our actions, our structures through that lens of equity, knowing that these gaps exist. Next slide, please. So if you look at the tree map to the left, in terms of the 3 categories, we have our instructional framework, we have restorative practices, and we have interventions and acceleration. These have been cornerstones of our structure. And to the right, Dr. Feltner has, for the past couple years, been bringing this quote forward to us as leaders, that structural change that's not supported by cultural change will eventually be overwhelmed by the culture. For it's the culture that any organization finds meaning and stability. So we're looking at our structures and ensuring that they become part of our culture. And in doing so, that's the work we've been doing over the last couple years. But our equity work further strengthens those structures. It moves us towards that cultural change. So at the bottom, we're creating that culture of learning around this work so that we can further strengthen those 3 branches and continue to do that work. We want our leaders to be able to be confident and competent in moving that work forward. Next slide, please. One thing that we did as district leaders this summer was we engaged in a district book study. And the text that we used was Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations About Race. We introduced the text and the tool, used it with each other for some honest conversation. There's a tool within the text that really supports dialogue. We're going to practice that with you today. And the reason why we chose this text was it seemed easier for us to talk about gender gaps, to talk about gaps with regard to programs such as our exceptional student education or even our English language learners. But when it got to time to talk about some of our racial gaps, it's a harder conversation because sometimes it creates discomfort. So using the protocol and engaging in this book study helped us to be able to have a clear protocol to move forward in the dialogue and to be able to engage at a deep level around maybe some of the why as to why gaps exist in our system. So our next slide, I want to first orient you and have you see a video from Mr. Glenn Singleton, who is the author of the book, and then I'll walk you through that tool that we use, and we'll engage in some practice as well.
I'm definitely not the first to talk about a compass, and to talk about a compass from the place of understanding that we need direction. We need to understand where we are and where we're going. And very personally speaking, the compass has just arrived in my mind as this understanding that I typically approach race from an emotional space. And I lived in that quadrant of feeling. And I noticed that for lots of people who didn't approach race from an emotional space, it was often hard for them to hear me. And so initially I believed that, well, you know, it's just a feeling for me, and for me to be authentic, I got to stay with my feeling. But then I thought a little longer, a bit deeper on this. And I recognized that I'm more than feeling. I'm also some thinking. I have some beliefs. And I have this drive to take action, to act on this situation. And so, how would I get myself out of the feeling quadrant and into another quadrant? And I looked across this idea of what feels opposite to me, to my emotion, my intellect. And that's how the compass is not only designed, but that's how it was created. I needed to move. I needed to grab onto other dimensions of me as I was exploring these ideas connected to race. And I'm not saying that the emotional statements are not valuable, important, powerful, but I'm saying that the emotional statements are more valuable and more powerful when they're coupled with intellectual inquiry. And so for me, the compass is centering myself on what's natural and normal for me, the emotion connected to race, with what I've also had to develop in me, my intellect, and my ideas, and even my concerns, and my questions about race. And when I put those together, I'm having a conversation in the acting quadrant that's way different. But even more, I now have a new belief about race. I have a belief that if I balance these things, the persons who are engaging with me have more of an opportunity to actually hear what I'm saying. And as you find yourself acquainted with your first quadrant, then look across the compass to what awaits you and what development is possible for you. And use the rest of the book to approach that new part of the compass. And in doing so, you will do that thing that I'm describing called getting centered.
So if you take a look at the compass, each of the quadrants, as Mr. Singleton described, is a way that you might enter into a conversation. Based on your background, based on your experience, you might come in one side or the other more strongly. So if you look at the emotional side at the bottom left, you may come in feeling emotional. Actually, a feeling is triggered. It might be happiness, anger, rage, whatever it is, it's a feeling. And at the top, you may come in believing, right, with a kind of moral identity in terms of a rightness and wrongness, what you've been taught with regard to your values. You may enter into a conversation there. Or to the other side, where we're thinking, we're coming in and we're responding because we're not sure. We need more data. We're thinking about what else do I not know? How do I process this? What have I seen before? Or at the bottom, relational. Like this reminds me of something I've done, or I want to act, or it's moving me to action. One side, the left side, is more about your heart, and the other side is kind of more about your head, the thinking. So this happens with regard to dialogue, but it also happens in terms of situations. So to give you an example, I can say I'm on the one side, the other side with emotion, and I'm thinking about my relationship with my husband. I say, you need to tell me more that you care about me. And he's on the other side, and he's thinking more relationally, well, I went and got the groceries out of the car. I put gas in your car. I did all these things. I did these actions, right? So we're entering in at two sides, and we want to center ourselves to kind of figure out how do we hear each other and know that caring comes out in different ways. Similar to a conversation. When you're entering in, you might be entering in from one side and feeling more about the value, more about the feeling, and another person's entering in more intellectually. So this really helped us in our conversation because it forces you to identify where you're entering and try to center yourself. But it also acknowledges that other people are entering at other places and to be able to help see their perspective. So let's practice with regard to the compass really quickly. So if you go to the next slide, just for the purpose of personalizing the experience before we practice with a text, go ahead and click one time for me. I want you to locate yourself on the following topic. So when the topic comes up, which quadrant do you go to? And you don't have to yell it out or anything. You can just do it independently, right? Just so we can practice. So here's our first topic. The topic is today's board meeting. Did you come in today up at the top like, I am here to make a difference. This is my role. I value this process. Or did you come in more towards the bottom? I'm so happy. I can't wait to get here. And you were in your emotion. Were you up at the top right where I'm thinking about what this will be. I want to know more. This is something I'm engaging in and really want to research. Or more at the bottom. There's going to be action from this meeting, and the next action I take is going to be around what I learned today. So you came in maybe in all the areas, but more so maybe in one. And across the board, people might be coming in at different places. So identify where you are there. Let me give you the next topic, and let's see if you change position. Next topic will be school grades. When I say school grades, where do you enter in? Emotional, believing, thinking, acting. Where does that drive you? And how about our last topic? COVID vaccinations, right? We definitely have different places that people arrive and come in with regard to that conversation. And if you want to share where you came in on any of these.
We'd love to hear that. Let's practice first.
I will.
Okay.
Today's board meeting, I really focus on trying to come in on the intellectual portion. I probably have a different background from almost everyone in the room. I actually attended segregated schools. So when you talk about schools and race, and I grew up in Alabama on a farm. So I bring all this emotion, but my education and my past 37 years of working in schools with people of all races and children, I know in my head that I need to leave that behind, and I need to listen to the facts and I need to let the data drive me. Whereas with school grades, again, my relationship and my past experiences caused me to come in very emotional. I have some very strong feelings about about grading of schools. And part of that comes from past experiences. I know the highs and lows of it. I know the work that goes into working and then not getting that good grade. And I understand that sometimes in the minds of the public, that means that you're a less than good school, or your people didn't work hard, or there's some things you didn't do. And then the last, should I do the last one?
Sure.
Okay. The last one, COVID. After watching 60 Minutes last night, I don't know if any of you saw that, I actually changed. If I had had this question yesterday, I would have been at my head. But after watching the episode on 60 Minutes last night, I'm emotional because I saw a lot of families who lost their relatives, and it was a very sad thing, and it triggered emotion for me. So if the demonstration is to show us that depending on the subject, we will vary in how we feel, I got it.
Absolutely. And just what you went through and sharing that was the dialogue that many of us went through. Sharing experiences based on all of those things, as well as the experiences that we've had that contribute to why we feel that way. So based on this, we've had an opportunity to engage in dialogue that we probably would have never engaged in, because the tool assisted with supporting how we're coming into a conversation and why, and then someone else saying, I'm coming in now intellectually and I have a question for you about that. And so it decreases the, the tense feel about dialogue, because we're using a protocol and a tool that helps us engage. Any others? Okay.
Anyone else want to share? Okay. So we're going to practice with a piece of text. As you know, we read, write, think, and talk in all good trainings. And so I've given you a piece of text behind the data. And it's an excerpt from the book, Courageous Conversations About Race. And so here's what I'd like for you to do. So as you read, I gave you a highlighter as well. You can underline or highlight. I'd like for you to just highlight places that trigger one of the four quadrants in your head. So you might underline a sentence because that kind of strikes you emotionally. You might underline a sentence because it shows action, or you want to know more about it, or it triggers that an intellectual piece, or there's a moral piece to it. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to read, and so we're just going to be quiet as you do some reading, and then we'll have some conversation. Just know that I'm going to ask that you share a piece that you marked, and then why you marked it on a certain place in the quadrant. Any questions? So start on the second page of that piece, because the second page is the article. It says Melissa Cruel at the top. We'll go over the conditions for having a conversation second. So if you'll start with the actual Melissa Cruel autobiography. Or a few more minutes, be okay? A couple more minutes? Any more? I'm just doing a time check. 2 or 3? You just want to come up? Ms. Cunningham,
I'm
you
good.
okay?
Okay.
Dr. Burns, you okay? Hopefully you've found a place to mark or to just to practice with the text. So I'm going to ask if you'll go back to the PowerPoint for me. And I just want to, if you'll flip back in that handout to the first page where it talks about the 4 agreements of courageous conversations, just before we have a conversation, just to take a look at that piece.
Next slide.
Go to the next slide. Right there, yeah. So, and just, he just offers us 4 agreements to just remind us of a few things. One is that engagement is a part of dialogue, so making sure that we stay engaged and that we speak our truth from wherever it comes. That we often might experience discomfort based on the conversation, and that it's okay, because some of us enter from a stronger quadrant of the compass. And that we expect and accept non-closure. We may not make decisions, but we've had the conversation to at least get our thinking to move forward. And we learn from each other through all conversations. He also talks about this quote that's up here on the slide, and it talks about this idea that we often do not engage in conversations about race because we're not sure how to have the conversation. But he warns us that when we don't discuss race, then we further contribute to the devastating effects of the achievement gap. So we have to talk about it just to get some action. So we're going to practice talking about it. And so I've asked you to read. And so if you go to the next slide. I'm just going to ask that anybody who wants to, if you'll share a portion of the text that resonated with you, and then where you located yourself on the map, on the compass. So I'll do a couple of examples just to kind of get us started. And I'm going to use the frame that's below, the I highlighted and placed myself at, because. So if you look at the second paragraph of the text, about halfway down, I think it's the 4th sentence, it starts with our teachers. I highlighted our teachers were nuns, and our school leader was the Monsignor, who was a holy, staunch, and robust man of Catholic faith. And I placed myself at the intellectual location just because I found it interesting. It's very different from where I went to school. Like, I don't have any Catholic school upbringing, so I just thought I would love to know more about that kind of education. So I'd be interested to have a conversation about what was that like. It was very different from my public education experience. So I just marked it and put an I next to it. On the 3rd paragraph, I'll do one more. The 2nd sentence, I highlighted the racial slurs that were bantered about by white kids and our classmates of color were commonplace. And I put an emotional piece there. I put an E there because it kind of hit me in the gut. And it was the word commonplace that sort of struck me emotionally. Like, wow, the idea that racial slurs were commonplace is just heartbreaking. And I would hate for my own kids to experience that. So I put an E next to that sentence because I thought, it's just, using the word commonplace was very different than using the word occasionally, or, sometimes. I was like, oh my God, commonplace. That means it happens every day, all the time, and nobody notices the difference, right? So I was like, it just struck me emotionally. So those were my 2 examples. What did you all mark, and why? Anybody want to start?
Well, I'll start out since you hit those 2 points.
Okay.
Because I am Catholic, and so immediately I connected to it and grew up very similar, middle low-income community. I would attend public school because my dad was in public service school board, so he was going to have his kids in public school while he served. As soon as he got off, he put both my sisters in Catholic school, though. So I really connected to that. The racial slurs, emotional because I remember coming home in the 5th grade, and I had learned this new word. It was the N word. And before I could get it out of my mouth, my mom had me in the bathroom washing my mouth out with soap. And to this day, even when I think about it, there's bubbles. But it was common in the South, and more than just that, it was everybody sort of had a nickname. You identified them somehow. So those.
Yeah.
So I'll just stop it happening.
I'm
Okay, go ahead, Dr.
no, the sound was, I messed up the sound. What was the question?
So I was just asking, was there any place that you marked? And if there was a sentence or two that you marked, and where did you place yourself on the compass?
Okay. I also, where would I place myself on the compass would be, probably
I mean, which sentence did you mark?
a lot.
Do you want to give us an example of one?
So one thing that, like Bill mentioned, I also was raised Catholic, and so all the, I didn't go to a Catholic school, but I definitely recognize a lot of the upbringing and the teachings in there. I think the line that was most noticeable was the obvious racial disparities had been hidden within an educational system that reveled in significantly higher test scores for students and celebrated numerous AP and national merit and premier athletic teams, which is something we want to do. But I just thought, I don't know, because I was raised Catholic, and my father runs a restaurant in Groveland, and the majority of his employees are Black. And so I started when I was 11, so I was sort of raised by the people in Groveland, and we're definitely heavily influenced by them. And I've seen my whole life how poorly Black people can be treated in Lake County. And so I think where I fall on it is like an emotional sense of helplessness. Like, it bothers me morally, but I don't know what to do about it, about racial inequities. And then I freeze and don't know how to move forward to make things better. And that's something I want to learn.
So I can share with you guys, on the last page, I think it was when she talked about the data. I think I put it in here. It says the racial violence described in the story resonates with injustice prevalent in our specialized education services where predictable racial educational achievement disparities persist at the highest level. And then, so this is where it started. That was actually on the first page in the fifth paragraph down, where she starts talking about pursuing the career in education and require No Child Left Behind Act requiring the disaggregation of data by race. And so I think that for me as an educator, if I go to the intellectual level, it wasn't until I saw the scores broken down like that, and this would have been, probably 10 years ago when we were talking about that work, that it was glaringly obvious. I mean, like, there's not anything to say about it when you see the numbers, right? It kind of flies all over you. Emotionally as well, because I think as teachers, we think that we love our kids and we think we're doing the best for our students that we can do. And I truly believe that. Like, I can tell you, I thought the same thing. But when you really look at the data, then it tells you a different story that you can begin to work from. And I will tell you guys, I share this I update the data and I share it every summer with my students in one of the classes that we have. And the feeling hasn't changed, which is what it makes me emotionally maybe and actionably charged, is that how do we continue to have the same kind of data conversations year after year, and we're not, even though now it's come to the forefront of education where we're speaking about a lot of the disparities, that we're still driving towards the change. So at least we're having the conversations, but for me, it was the glaring, I remember the day that I saw the data and it was like, oh my gosh, like it was very obvious. And the other part that I'll tell you guys was interesting to me that I hadn't really thought about when we talked about we lived in an integrated neighborhood, no one really had much in terms of money. Like, I grew up in that state as well. And my very best friend at one of the 6 elementary schools that I went to, like, if we're really being honest, was Lavonda. And I loved Lavonda. And her brother Henry was always in trouble. But I'm going to tell you, like, on the playground, that boy stood up for me anytime something happened. But when Lavonda, I would ask if she could spend the night. And now that I think about it, like, my parents were very hesitant. Not because they didn't want a Black young lady to spend the night with us, because they were uncomfortable with with things that could maybe be said, or should we be mixing? And like, that's so strange to me to think about because we were such good friends. But to think about the state that my parents grew up in, probably similar to Mrs. Cunningham's experience, and then wondering, like, is this okay? Should we have this conversation? And I remember, like she said, she can remember racial slurs. I don't remember that. I just remember being friends and being like, well, why can't she spend the night? And they were like, okay, I guess she can. And then that was all it was. And so it's just interesting. We don't think about those things, but when you put it in that context, it was definitely there. So.
Thank you.
I had some initial emotional connections between thinking about money was never abundant, one half of the duplex, Catholic, all these things are okay. Take me right back to the childhood there, and then thinking about my elementary school, it was way across town. Attempts to try to create some racial balance, and so it was in the heart of a traditionally black neighborhood. And as a result, we had a lot of diversity in the school. And then this paragraph here about having the racial slurs being commonplace, that brought an emotional connection for me, like you. But then the next part made me, put me more in the thinking area about the kids of color seemed immersed in the school culture with us, well-liked and included, so we thought, same thing, that I had great friends with, I was friends with just about everybody in the school, but then I'm just, thinking, brings me back to that thinking, were there things that were being said by kids that, people didn't think anything of at the time? I don't know, and I wish I had that vivid of a memory to go back to some of those conversations, just wondering, were there things that made kids feel uncomfortable that I didn't notice, I don't know.
Mark, can I tell you a story about what happened when we shared this with leaders, a little, that goes just with that?
Yeah.
Exact, a little vignette. One of the things that happened is that we started talking about names, and how if we can't, so people's names and how much they matter to us, and if we can't pronounce somebody's name, we give them a nickname. And so one of the action steps you were asking about, what are we doing, right? So one of the first things and one of the easiest things that school took back was that we're gonna call people by their name. It matters to them. And even though they say, like, well, can I call you Jay? Instead of something, instead of whatever the name is, if it was longer, they couldn't pronounce it, from all different cultures. And they immediately, they had a conversation with their equity coalition and teachers, they launched that, and we're gonna call people by their given name. Because it was that whole idea of, are we doing things that we don't realize that maybe matters to kids, but we don't realize it does, right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because now as you say that, I can certainly think about many kids along the way that the teacher would be calling roll on the first day, and the teacher would be struggling. The kid says, "Oh, just call me so and so," and now I'm wondering, did that kid really want to be called that, or what? Was it the years of struggles that just made them resort to that spot? So then, all this just kind of ties together for me on the next page there. I highlighted, I lacked deep understandings about race. I had easily overlooked my entire life, even while I was surrounded. There's kind of just there's that moral guidance there of. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and so that's where these conversations become important.
Could I add something about the name thing? I only had a personal revelation about it recently, because Amber Ruffin is a comedian, and she's on Peacock now, and she had a bit where she was very frustrated that President Biden couldn't say Vice President Kamala Harris's name right, and he kept saying Kamala. And I think Saturday Night Live made fun of that too. But what was so profound to me was when she said, come on guys, Kamala isn't that much harder than Pamela, first of all. And then second of all, we gave up our names, is what she says. That the descendants of slaveholders gave up their names that had been given to them by slaveholders, which I had never considered, and that they went and chose African names, and she said the phrase, and our names are beautiful, and our names fill up your mouth with beautiful language like Shaquila and Tanisha, and I had never considered that before. And I thought, wow, how important is a name? Like, it really is important. And, you know, is it Tavares or Tavares or, you know, there's a million beautiful names in our schools, and I never thought to celebrate those at all. I was what, racist in that I thought they were weird names too. I never thought of it as a cultural difference. So I thought that would be interesting on the name front.
You want to share anything, Ms. Cunningham?
The one that I marked was it's on the first page, the first 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, the last sentence. It says, "Today I understand the lasting and injurious effect of a moral compass devoid of racial justice." And for me, that's emotional.
Yeah. So when we practice with a text, it's a safe place to practice with, right? Because we can share what we want, we can point it back to a piece of text. And it has really helped us to have other conversations and remember the compass. Like we'll be like, okay, even if it's on something that's not race related, we'll say, you know, I always use this example. In fact, I use it with the leaders that I will come in emotionally charged about something, and to senior staff, and I'll be saying, listen, we have got to have this. We got to do this. We got to put, and like Scott Ward does not react. He does not rise to my emotional level. You know what I mean? Because he's completely approaching it from an intellectual point of view. Like he's thinking money. How much is it going to cost? How long how many years am I going to, who's paying for it? What fund do you use it? And I'm like, we have to do this for kids. And so you come in and nobody's with me on it, you know, but part of it is that's kind of my role in senior staff. But the other piece is I needed to understand that they're coming in from a way different lens. Or when I hear, you know, and like when Mr. Farnsworth says something about, well, let's talk about how we would negotiate that. And I'm like, no, but everybody has their lens, right? So he's like, okay, what would the action steps needed to be that we'd have to do that? So when I think about that, now I don't say, well, you're being insensitive. Don't you care about kids? Of course he cares about kids. He also cares about money because that's his job, right? So that's his position when I talk to Scott. So now I come in where like, okay, I've got to center myself because I will probably get more action and people will listen to me more if I think about money, what action steps, along with my emotion, and then be able to plead for a need for it, you know? So I have to get centered before I walk in and then have those conversations. So the compass has really, really benefited a lot of us as leaders and district leaders and school leaders on any conversation that we have to help us understand that people will listen more if you approach them in a way that you might see how they might enter, and B, maybe pare down a little bit where you're coming in, you know, and get centered. And Katie always says, okay, let's get centered about this before we have a bigger conversation about it. So we thought it might be helpful for you because these conversations are hard, especially when they do revolve around race, all races. And I think the compass has really been a benefit, and I wanted you to kind of know how that's kind of unfolded in schools. So thank you for participating. Absolutely.
Sorry. This may be a little bit advanced too, because I appreciate the whole, this takes some time and it's getting there, but I also, like when we were talking about kids and like the experience that students are having, I just feel like the conversations that are happening on social media, they just don't, I mean, we're talking about this emotional compass and this reasonability, and then our students are especially our high school students are having conversations that are not. They're probably way more emotionally focused, and are we having these conversations with kids as well, is I guess what my question is.
We really want to.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that's definitely, I hope, you know, that we're getting there. I think as we do more work with, this is a great, and we'll talk about this a little bit, and I think she's going to talk about it next, actually, but, yes, I mean, that's certainly a place we never, yes, I mean, we totally need to have the conversation with them, don't we? Yes.
Has anyone talked to Sergeant Frederick Jones and the curriculum they have? It's required for guardians, it's required by the Sheriff's Department, where it really looks at implicit bias, and it is amazing when you reflect on yourself. If you notice, some of the first things that came out were emotional. It connected to where we are, and I think that for all of us, that I always thought that I could relate to black kids because of how I grew up, but I never walked the walk. I got a phone call from Lauren Ritchie, as a matter of fact, and I was advocating for the Boys and Girls Club to help those kids. And I thought that I really understood. She goes, no, you don't. because you've never walked it. Well, I thought I could, but I can't, because when you hear the stories of other people and others' background, then you realize you got to really kind of look at yourself first to get control, and then that will help you to place yourself in your compass.
And so if I can add on to that, I feel like that's where I'm coming from, because thank goodness my freshmen in high school will still have those conversations with me. I said still, there's like a caveat, but we'll have those conversations. And I often struggle with, am I telling her the right thing? And I try to situate myself in some of Dr. Muhammad's work and so forth when we're having these conversations. And like we've talked about, what is your belief system? What do you believe? And then if you believe that, then how does that translate? She's been challenged, she's been supported, but like these are things that a 15-year-old, and I read this text and I talk about how are we helping our students support each other, and are we engaging they're so politically bound. I mean, the conversations around the political race that we just had, they're just so misinformed and it gets so convoluted. And so I feel the same exact way. Like I try to think about these kids that I love, that I know, who are her very best friends, who are white, who are black, who are Asian, who are mixed race. But am I feeding into her the right way? And so if they're not having conversations with adults, then how are they doing that? And so that's exactly where I would just wonder, like, how are we building up these young adults who are talking about it in a way that's going to support each other and not be made to feel the way they're sometimes made to feel.
And the challenge is they're learning from their parents.
Yes.
And that it almost takes generations
Yes.
to, as I call it, colorblind. Like, I think my sons are colorblind. I wasn't. I knew there was a difference, right? But my parents told me how to behave. And so, you know what I mean? So it's learning. But these kids are coming to school with what they've learned at home until they can deal with kids and teachers, whatever their backgrounds are.
And even telling them to be strong and confident in their beliefs. Like, just because you disagree doesn't mean you don't love her. Or how do you have this conversation with her that's informed versus emotional? Like, there's even been those challenges that we faced. So that's why I feel like, Lord help me do that, but then how are we helping our other students do that as well?
And I don't know, there's a Mr. is it Bill Johnson? He was the principal at Carver, the last principal. And when I met with him when I was first running for school board, he shared with me that in Leesburg, the expectation was you go work at Minute Maid. That's where, so at 8th grade, you drop out and go to Minute Maid. The kids that did well, black kids that did well academically, within their own group were called Uncle Toms and whatever. And so those kids, because the freezes happened in the 80s, those are the parents that didn't value education then. So how do you close the gap? You don't have that core that promotes education, right? And where do we fit in trying to? That's always been in my mind. Got to get the parents engaged, would close the gap somehow. And if the parents won't do it, I suppose you have to come up with a strategy where we do it. And I don't know.
I think it goes back to what you're saying is how do we have the conversations during the day within a curriculum that supports, like we teach standards and those issues come up, right? And they will. Like, kids want to talk about it.
Yes, they do.
I think we have really been having some conversations about how do we teach teachers how to have this. We had to teach leaders how to have it. We had to teach ourselves how to have these conversations. We were staying away from some conversations that we should be engaging in. And because we didn't, and I was one of them. I use we as I'm one that I didn't know. I'd have to ask Katie, like, I didn't even know exactly how do you talk about the subgroups. Like, what are they called? Is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? Is it white? Is it Caucasian? Like, what's on the paper? Because you'd see it 4 different ways. So I'm like, all right, let's talk to the cabinet. What's the right terminology? Because even that, getting up and presenting data was a little bit, 2 years ago, was a little bit sensitive for me because I didn't know how to address it. And so I think, but we have to teach each other how to have these conversations and how to stay in a place where we can hear each other. I think that's part of the work that we're doing with restorative practices, and Katie's going to talk next about kind of the next step we did with leaders with restorative practices. That's a big portion of that work, I think, where it fits. And then how do we help people use protocols to have these conversations so that we'll listen to each other, and then how do we engage the community in it as well. I do think there's a place there, just like you're saying, for parents, and so I agree. Any other comments about this particular piece?
Well, just as the question about conversations with students, and we want to have those. I'll share with you and the rest of the board an idea I've kind of talked to the superintendent, Dr. Feltner, briefly about was I just remember going back last year, I had read The Devil in the Grove, and then the author had come to dedicate the new memorial. And I thought that book was very thought-provoking for me and shocking to think, well, it mentions the Lake County School Board, multiple pages in there, and some of the crazy actions that the board had taken at the time and done. I thought that it's just shocking to me that this is history. This occurred really in her own backyard. And wouldn't it be great if we could have more of these conversations in a standard-based approach that also addresses this moral issue? I thought, the trouble with, teachers' plates is that everybody's got a good cause, right? And, teach your kids the importance of wearing a bicycle helmet. Teach your kids the importance of treating animals with respect. Teach your kids water safety. Teach your kids how to be safe on the internet. The list just goes on and on and on. And this is just another one of those moral things. While very important, teachers would go, that's one more thing on my plate. So I thought maybe you almost approach it in a DBQ sort of sense, that if you get some teachers involved who could pull together some primary and secondary sources and make this look like the other DBQs we've got in our folders, in our library of those, that now you could integrate some of these conversations into the classroom in a standards-based approach, and that makes it academic as well as
And choosing text from all perspectives, so
That's
that,
right.
so that people can start, so that kids can start to engage in a conversation. We teach them how to have a conversation where they agree and disagree, and I go back to all the work we've done with having that collaboration as part of our framework, where we want kids to talk. So give them, and we want them to talk about something that's meaningful and authentic, right?
That's
so
right.
that groundwork that we've laid for that, we just got to continue some of that work.
I'd even settle for reasonable sources of information and how to discern fact from fiction at this point. I mean, seriously, that's what we need to equip the next generation with is, what do you believe? You don't believe everything you read on the internet. And we joke about it, but finding sources that are legitimate sources. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a perfect example of the robust dialogue that we can have from utilizing the protocol and the text. The text has bits of learning and then additional autobiographies similar to this, which allow us to talk more. I think that's what is missing from dialogue is context. And when you hear someone else's story or their why behind where they fall on the compass, it just lends more to how do we further engage. I agree with you, Ms. Luke, that it can be polarizing. That's what we see happening. But it doesn't have to be. In terms of dialogue, we just had a great dialogue together and talked about things that you probably wouldn't just throw on the table to talk about. But because the compass opens us up, we're able to engage in a deeper place and then use our data around that to say, well, how is that impacting our data and our own system? So we thank you for participating.
I do have one more question, that as we are developing this, at some point, I see a time when we just talk about kids, and we don't have to talk about color. What is your vision, or where do you think we will end up when this work is done?
Yeah, I think that is where it's where we've always wanted to be, right? As the disparity is there, it forces us to begin to talk about color, especially when it's within many elements of our system. I think as we close the gap, then that goes away, right? But we have to talk about why the gap is there first.
Right.
Yeah, we wouldn't be talking about color necessarily if our data didn't show that we need to talk about color. So we also need to talk about students with disabilities. That's another place that we know we've got a lot of work to. I mean, if you look at this data, the red is equal, and abundant in the ESE line. And so we've got to talk about that too. What are our expectations? How do we raise expectations for all kids? So we hope as well that we stop talking about whether they're white, black, Hispanic, male, female. They're just our kids, and we're all achieving at high levels. I mean, that's our commitment. That's what we're saying. We're going to work till we get there. I mean,
but the pushback is, just in all honesty, is that if you look at a group of students by color, and you know that you have students that are failing that are Hispanic and white and Asian, and you're not dealing with that also, or at least as openly, then the community pushes back pretty hard.
Right. Yeah. And we are. We talk about our bottom quartile as a whole unit, and that's not disaggregated, right? So when we look at the needs of our learners, we are looking at it from multiple perspectives. Our group that's not making learning gains is not disaggregated necessarily by race, But in this situation, we wanted to dig a little bit deeper and see if we have those same disparities that we see nationwide, and then where are they in our system? So we do both. I think it's an extra layer, just an extra lens, but it doesn't take away from what we already do, looking at all of our students and how we can support their needs.
Excellent.
I'd like to say something. The way I look at it, especially as a principal, is if you take two children to the doctor and they have similar symptoms, the cause of the disease or the condition that they have may be quite different. And the treatment, of course, would have to be different because you want to reach whatever they need to make them better. You can take COVID and the flu as an example. They have very similar symptoms, but they aren't treated the same. So I think when you think of the different subgroups, you have to look at what is happening in those subgroups and what presents itself as a problem. And then we have to give to each group whatever medicine they need to bring them up to being a well person. So I don't think we should ever not look at any subgroup or any group of people that aren't doing well, because they all need to do well. Because if you switch it, then we got the same problem, it's just a different subgroup. So I think in terms of race, while I definitely look forward to a day like you described, Mr. Matthias, I'm not sure. I'm not as optimistic. I don't know when it'll happen. But I think the important thing is that we work on it and that we're making strides toward getting there. And as long as we're improving, I think we're doing our job. So that's my goal.
Yeah.
Can I ask, one of the big complaints from, I guess, I don't know, the white community? I'm not sure how to phrase things.
The majority.
The majority, okay. Is that when if, for example, if we were to take the Devil in the Grove, that happened, right? Like, we know that happened. And so did, like, the Holocaust. I personally wasn't raised, or I was raised here, but my mother is from, like, Connecticut or something. So I don't have, like, Southern guilt, but a lot of Southerners have real guilt, like generational guilt, that like their great grandparents were, or great were slave owners. And how do you address something like Devil in the Grove? Or can you address it sensitively without it just being, the concern is that the goal is just to create guilt. And I don't think it is. I think it's to move past that in the same way we remember the Holocaust. But I was wondering if there was a, I don't know, good response to that sort of a concern from the community. Maybe there's not a good response.
I don't know if I know exactly that. I think, I will say that our focus has been with inside the system currently. I think it's, I agree with you, Ms. Cunningham. The work, I'm not sure we're ever gonna be done with the work. I mean, clearly it's hundreds and hundreds, I mean, I don't know we're gonna stop doing it, you know what I mean? So I think there's a portion, I think we do have to educate everybody about things. I don't know, you may have a better answer to that, I don't know. I mean, I haven't thought about that, Dr. Burns, in terms of, I think part of it is just understanding each other, and I don't think we're doing that as much, and,
Talking it out.
yeah, and having more conversations about where the guilt comes from. I don't think it's my role to make you feel more or less guilty, but just to have a perspective on where it comes from, and then maybe how we can talk about it with kids. I mean, I think the beauty of our work is that kids are at the center, right? So we can stay away from a lot of conversations that don't lead us to improving life for students, especially during the day when we hold that key and when we know that there's some work that we can do ourselves. And I think we've got to start there, and then I'm hoping that we create students who go out into the world and can help us make the world a better place, right? So I know it sounds very philosophical, but I wouldn't do the work unless I believed in it, you know?
No, I think that's spot on. I think when you know better, you do better, right? And so I think that's the lesson we're trying to send when you can look back at history and say, look at what this time looked like here in Lake County. Now we know better. You all are our leaders now. let's go out and make the world a better place. That's the kind of message I think you should be walking away from. And just, with that, I think you get some of the other conversations of how many things still exist now that we just don't even realize that we're just immune to, okay, you go ride Splash Mountain, right, and you hear some zippity-doo-dah music, and you think, oh, this is all fun and whimsical. Meanwhile, that's all taken straight out of the movie Song of the South that ride is based on, and now Disney World is changing the theming of that entire ride, right? So, I mean, it's just one of those things when you know better, you do better, and that's the message we've got to send to people to go out and be that light.
And
That
on
is a good
note, we're going
message.
to take a 5-minute restroom break.
Very
5
good.
minutes, good? Next slide.
Is it frozen? Okay, thank you. Okay, and so our leaders engage and experience the compass, just like you've experienced the compass. Along with that, we've engaged in some responsive circles to get a scale and really check in on ways that our leaders might need additional support or where they are in leading with regard to the equity coalition. So this was just an example of some of the questions that we utilize with our leaders to see where they are and then also engage in some additional dialogue. So their understanding of educational equity, that's important, right? As a leader, where am I? So we introduced a scale of 1 to 5 so that they could be able to be honest about I'm a 3 or I'm a 5 or I'm a 1 and I need additional support. And then we talked about why. We also asked their confidence engaging in these conversations. First, with their leadership team, how do you feel there? And then engaging with staff. We certainly don't want them to open up a conversation with staff when they are not yet comfortable. So part of that was how do we design our learning so that we can ensure that our leaders are comfortable in engaging in these conversations moving forward and looking at their equity data across the board at deeper levels. Then the equity team. So we were all challenged by Dr. Muhammad in his presentation at the summer to go back and create an equity team, and that is what our leaders have done. And so we talked about where they were with that work, where they might need additional support, and had an opportunity to check in. On the next slide, this was the text that is Dr. Muhammad's book, Overcoming the Achievement Gap Trap, that we all received during the summer leadership. And so schools are now utilizing that equity data. They're collaborating in equity coalitions, and then they're engaging in equity dialogue at different levels, but they're all committed to doing those 3 things. So our leaders, on the next slide, our leaders could not be here, but we did have a few leaders that were able to make a quick video to describe to you some of the work that they've been doing since that time. So I'll let you listen to them.
Hello, I'm Dr. Scott, the principal at Eustis Heights Elementary School, and I wanted to take a moment to share with you how the district's professional development on equity has really influenced our work here at Eustis Heights. For me as a leader, that work really began in the 2019-20 school year when we started our leadership trainings around the opportunity myth. The opportunity myth really shared with us how the research suggests that there's 4 major elements that students need in order to have an equitable learning experience. And that's that students have grade appropriate assignments, deep engagement, strong instruction, and high expectations. From that point forward, the district's professional development really aligned. Everything that we did from that point on was really connected back to that research through the instructional framework and even our administrative walks that we do monthly to norm our practice and to have a common understanding of these practices. That work for me was then was taken even further this summer when we had the opportunity for Dr. Muhammad to come in and provide administrators and some of our teams with training on his book called Overcoming the Achievement Gap Trap, Liberating Mindsets to Effect Change. And a part of that training, one of the really shifts for me was when the district provided us with our school data, and The data wasn't necessarily surprising, but what was surprising was that they asked us to look at that data through the lens of each student. What does that say about their experience on our campus? And that really was powerful for me and really shifted my focus as a leader, because from that point on, it was more than just how my black students were performing or how white students or ESC students, but I wanted to know from each of those perspectives, what was their experience going to be like on our campus? And so we further continued that work in November with our another instructional walk, where we coupled those learnings with a text from Courageous Conversations about race. And collectively, those things really changed the way that we did things on campus. And so for this school year, for the 2021 school year, we really made an effort to take the learning that we've gained as leaders and apply those principles on campus. One of the things that we've done is I believe that in order for us to move forward with learning is that we have to have a common understanding. And so we've had a book study with our leadership team around this text so that we can build our knowledge as the school leaders who lead professional development on our campus. Another thing that we've done is provided students with voice and choice. That's a huge aspect of equity that we haven't tapped into. And then I've also participated in a book study with this text that I've mentioned before with Ms. Katie Pearson, with other leaders in the district, to have really candid conversations about how we can influence that work and begin those conversations on our campus, once again, in an effort to build equity. And that isn't something that we take lightly, and that whole mindset has really shifted the practice of teachers and what we're putting in front of students. And even within our PLCs, the thing that brings us back together is the fact that we're wanting to create equity from class to class. And so we use that as the common thread for everything that we do, whether it is an aspect of the instructional framework, whether it's giving students voice and choice for reading, whether it's a book study, and whether it is our equity team that we formed with various staff members on our campus. And so this work has really meant so much to me as a leader. It just really, it's like a light bulb that went off. It really ignited passion as well as a sense of urgency. And it gave me something to look at besides a big picture. It kind of narrowed my focus. So we're thrilled, we're excited to begin this work around equity. And I just really think that this is going to be the common thread that taps into our teachers' intrinsic motivation and align that with their practices so that we can create equitable learning environments for every student, every day on our campus. So thank you, Lake County Schools, for what you're doing. It's really making a difference in me as a leader, building my capacity and my ability to influence my staff based on research. Thank you.
Hello, my name is William Roberts, the very proud principal here at Whitney Hill Middle School, and I am very excited. Why am I excited? Because of the conversations we are having about equity. This summer, we were very fortunate during our summer leadership to be able to hear Dr. Anthony Mohammed, a renowned researcher and author of Overcoming the Achievement Gap, and something that he said resounded with our leadership team. Dr. Mohammed said that as public schools, students have the right to cultivate their gifts and have the ability for all children to learn. And we truly believe that at Whitney Hill Middle School because we are the home of the wolves and we say each and every day, one pack. But we truly want one pack to mean all. So from that summer meeting, we move forward in setting up our guiding coalition to take an honest look at our school and see how can we improve. Our guiding coalition includes teachers, staff members, and we are expanding to include parents and students as well, because we truly want one pack to mean all. And then from there, our district supported us with a professional development session on looking at our equity data, truly having an honest conversation. We looked at a district level, then at a regional level, and then at a school level. And then looking at our different demographics, what students' needs were being met and where were we falling short. And this lit a fire under us here at Windy Hill Middle School because we took this back to our staff and we had all of our teachers look at their equity data. Look at the students that are seated in front of them in the classroom. Are we underrepresented in our students having access to advanced coursework? Maybe we're overrepresented in certain populations that are experiencing discipline. And how can we do better? And in that, our guiding coalition is taking that charge to make it a better learning environment for all of our students. So I'm very excited because our data is pouring in from our teachers, as you can see, and we are going to use this data to make changes as we move forward. The first one is going to come with scheduling, looking at how can we provide more opportunities for all of the learners, for all of our populations here at Windy Hill Middle School. So one pack truly means one pack.
This year, the focus at Tavares High School has been equity and access for all of our students. We took the lead from Dr. Mohammed's Summer Leadership Academy that we had, and we really did a deep dive into our data to see where we could improve for all of our students. We first started with our department heads, and we looked at that data, kind of came up with some goals that we wanted to introduce to the rest of the faculty. Well, we decided to hold off on doing that, and we formed our equity coalition first, in which we invited other faculty members of our community from the city's various city council, the Chamber of Commerce, Lake County Sheriff's Department. We brought them in as well as with students. We wanted to make sure that we had all of our stakeholders involved in the process of equity. So once we've done that, we set our goals and we began to actually put steps in place to meet those goals. One of the areas that we've done is in our professional learning communities. We've really done deep dives into the data where we're actually looking at the intervention that we can do during our learning opportunities so that all students have that opportunity to be successful. And we have started to increase the number of students in our AP program in all ethnicities and on sex as well. So when we look at our data, we want to see that achievement gap closing by providing the opportunities, not just academically, but through our extracurriculars, through our discipline, and through our social and emotional opportunities here at the Tavares High School.
All right.
I think you can see that we have done some work. I will tell you that we have not had as many opportunities to go out and spend time with our leaders in terms of monthly learning walks like we have in the past. Due to COVID, we kind of taken a little bit of a slower approach to that. And we do see them in February again, so to continue that work as well. But I think you can see that just by the opportunities that they've had so far, that there is a lot of work being done. There's a lot of thought happening, and they've taken a little bit different approaches. And so as you go to this next slide, we talk about, I just want you to understand how much you have invested in equity as a board. And so these are things that have just in the last 4 years since the superintendent has been here and since you all have supported our work in terms of what's been happening. I just wanted to highlight some things that we've been working on that you all have had a huge part of and have passed different policies, opportunities for us. You know, each one of those leaders talked about this idea of summer leadership. And as you know, those opportunities to have people come in that are renowned and have done the work, that not only have done the work, but they have practical application, they speak to us as leaders in schools, it's expensive. And so taking a chance to bring those people in, having faith that our department at the district is choosing people that we know will be anchor people that help us continue our work throughout the whole entire year. Doug Fisher and Anthony Muhammad have been two of our really large people that have made some huge impact on us as a district and in what we're doing. So I just wanted to kind of highlight some places. You know, interventions, we now do not leave interventions to chance. Every school, we have mandated that they have an intervention block during at least 2 times a week. Most schools have it 4 times a week. It's an opportunity that we know, learning from some of the work that we've done, that quality instruction plus variance in time. Some kids need more time. Some kids need time for acceleration. That's been a huge portion of what's happening, and so I thank you for supporting that. You've allowed for purchases like LLI, which now just last week you looked at a grant that will allow us to have that in all schools, K-2. We just purchased Alex as well with some CARES dollars that allows us to at least implement those pieces and support systems that we can use in interventions. Thinking about restorative practices, a lot of work has gone into that, purchasing that opportunity for people, allowing us to become trainers of that work so that we can do most of that work now in-house and continue that training. The new alternative opportunities that we have for kids so that we can help them make better choices and use things like restorative practices and have them within our own system to be able to use our own leaders and teachers to make sure we're impacting them with Lake Success Academy and the LHS Excel program at Leesburg High. Knowing that we started with a common vision for instruction, we talk about that a lot, but honestly that became the foundation of our work, that this is what we want all kids to experience every day. And that's made up, that's sort of the foundation, and we've built upon that every year. We look at adoption materials and making sure that that kids can see themselves and all the resources and materials that we use. We've spent over $400,000 in classroom libraries in the last couple of years, making sure kids, like Dr. Scott talked about, having voice and choice in classroom, and making sure that our libraries are more diverse and that they allow kids to read things that interest them. Thinking about technology, honestly, I didn't really realize it till people brought it up, till Ms. Pearson talked about it as well, because I've used Performance Matters before, but Performance Matters, allowing that purchase has been instrumental in the way we pull data, being able to get the data that we showed you today quickly, being able to get it for schools, being able to take it down to the teacher level where teachers can click and get their own data. That system in itself has been really life-changing here in terms of access and allowing us to access our data. I'm thinking that we're one-to-one Chromebooks. Every kid has one. We also looked at kids who were marginalized and didn't have Wi-Fi, and so we've added some hotspots and been allowed to buy those and purchase those. Those are all things that have come across your board member meetings and desk and had to say and be able to vote for approval on. Thinking about that we're all on Google. We've kind of switched that. It was a little bit of a hard push at first, but that we understand Google. Kids have access to classrooms. Teachers have access to be able to use those tools to help reach kids. Thinking about all the professional learning we're doing, the learning walks in schools. Leaders have graciously opened up their doors to allow us to use their schools to learn in. And thinking about all the book studies that we're doing, we're engaging in more virtual PD and some face-to-face. Thinking about the policies and procedures, the changes that when we bring to you in the student progression plan and the code of student conduct. Thinking about our retention policy that was changed a few years ago. Opening up more enrollment into advanced courses, thinking about the whole redos, retakes, and grading practices. That's still an area that we're working and continuing to work. It's slow right now, but it's certainly an area that we know we need to keep going on. But just the idea that the redos and retakes, changing that language in our student progression plan has made a large difference in allowing kids to be successful. And then thinking about just the grant funding that comes across and looking at all those grant opportunities that we've done, looking at intensive reading, we are taking a look at that. You approved a large professional learning contract with Angela Schroden, and we've spent some time there last year really working with our intensive reading teachers and our literacy coaches to help improve those particular courses and how do we work more with ELA teachers side by side. And then, of course, the work that we do in DA schools, all of the work that we do with Ms. Pearson's department, as well as the supports that we put in with that through all of those opportunities from the state, as well as partnering with you guys. So I just wanted to thank you for that, to thank you for being open-minded, thank you for allowing us to sort of put some of these pieces into play, and that's work that we've done a lot. I think we should celebrate that. It's great work, and it all relates to for all kids to have access and equity to everything that we have here in Lake County. So, and if you notice on the next slide, it just talks about some actions to continue. I mean, we definitely know that we're in the beginning phases of having that equity lens on everything that we do, and just knowing that we want to continue to equip all leaders and teachers to meet the needs of all students, to make supports easily accessible to kids, to promote diversity and inclusiveness within classrooms, and also to think about how can we recruit, support, and retain effective teachers and principals, making sure that we treat people with grace and compassion, as the superintendent always says, be nice, and making sure that we keep those people who are leading this work. We know that all of our leaders and our teachers and everybody that works for our system has the intrinsic will to want to do what's right for everybody in our system and to do what's right for kids. I think we are still working on, some of us need more skill work, and some of us, we continue that work, and that's where the professional learning comes in. So we just have to keep going. I know sometimes on the next slide you'll notice, like, people always ask, so when will we see it? Like, when will we see it? I was very proud to bring you graduation data where there's some evidence of it over the last 4 years. So it's one of the reasons why I gave you a 4-year look at that work. What we know is that this work is very complex, and it can often appear slow-moving, both to us on the inside and to people who are watching us do the work. We know that we've done some critical foundational work, and it may not be easily visible. I think the progress is going to be measured in years, not necessarily months. We also know that the change is hard, that schools across the nation and the state are committed to equity, yet sometimes we find ourselves criticized both for doing too much and for doing too little. So, hoping that we continue the work, we keep talking about it to you as well as to all of our stakeholders to make sure that they understand what the work is and how we're going about it. And we also know that mistakes are going to happen. We know that our schools have made mistakes in the past, and despite our efforts, we'll make more in the future. But if we have a common understanding and we know how to work together to plan now, to respond appropriately, and to use mistakes as learning opportunities. I think we have to remember that as we continue this work and to keep asking the questions and keep doing the work, we remember that these are persistent and systemic challenges. They didn't come in yesterday, and they won't leave tomorrow. As the district leaders of our county, I think we're going to continue to grow in our own understanding of equity. We will help leaders do the same, and hopefully we'll create more opportunities for students to learn at high levels by refining and examining the aspects of our system. We have to look at all aspects of our system. And I think by doing that we can achieve our equity commitment. And so if you go to the next slide, I just want to remind you of that commitment again, that this commitment that we want to eliminate the disparities and make sure that our success is no longer predictable by any of the categories or subgroups, and just to ensure that all students experience success. So I know that Ms. Pearson and I came in pretty emotional about it. I was really, really excited to talk to you about this today. My learning curve has been straight up in this area in terms of how to lead it. And so I know we were excited to enter the room today, and I hope that we've given you an opportunity to have some conversation, learn more about what we're doing here. We'd be happy to answer any questions or comments that you have. We also do have a book for you if you did not receive one of the summer leadership books. The professional learning department does have some extras, and so I'd be happy to share that with you.
I have one question. By the way, the presentation was very much appreciated and excellent. And my question has nothing to do with your presentation. Do we still have a partnership with College Board for any of our schools?
We do. We sure do. So we offer the SAT, and so an ACT too, I think, right? We have a day, or is it SAT day?
I think they added ACT.
Are any of our leaders involved in the trainings they give on how to target kids and get them in those upper level AP and honors classes?
They still offer
So
us
they still go to
scholarships
that?
to do some AP training and the PSAT and how to look at that. We certainly do.
How engaged is the teachers' union in this work? And from your looks, I'm thinking not much.
So
They have an equity commission, right?
yeah, so again, I think from our seat, our lens is really we're working with leaders and teachers, and so I would say the union has a large number of people involved in this work, I hope, because we have lots of teachers that this work is beginning to filter down, Again, I think you've got to understand, in November we met and shared the data. I want you to understand the timeline. So summer was here. Lots of excitement with Dr. Muhammad. We think about, we did not see leaders. We did not meet with leaders. We had have an opportunity to share to go that next step until November. It was not our original intent. Of course, we would have started in August and then September and October. And yet we kind of knew that what was happening in schools, we needed to sort of approach that slowly. And so we met in November. We looked at data. They then worked with their equity coalitions to then look at data, also to practice the conversation with a smaller group of people. And then I think it's filtering down to teachers. You'll know that some leaders have definitely done it with their staff and done the work and showed the data. Others are working with that coalition and probably getting there this month and next month. So I think it's in various stages. So has my department had a direct conversation with necessarily the union leaders? No, we have not.
But at the end of the day, the teacher is the one that's going to make the change.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are going to affect the life. And I would certainly hope that they would be behind this hard work that you guys are putting together. Because you can lead, but you need those to buy in too, that are going to be
Yeah.
actually doing the work.
And I do think, I think teachers, I think like Ms. Pearson talked about earlier, that looking at it from an equity lens just gives us another perspective, right? That they've definitely, they're working on the work as it is, and I think they continue to do. And so I think the more we can have these conversations and educate everybody on maybe how to engage in the work, I think we'll see some changes. But I do think it's slower than we would like, especially this year.
Again, you're not planting annuals, you're planting trees.
Yeah.
So it takes a little bit more time.
Yes.
This is very good, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and I was kind of reflecting back on the idea of how to build capacity for this, because certainly that's critical. And at first I was slightly nervous as I was kind of hearing how the conversations are progressing, that by the time it gets down to the teacher or the student level, it's gone through so many folks initially, and that takes a long time for that to happen and for there to be that much buy-in. I think I get some more comfort when I hear about these equity coalitions at the school level, so those are made up of a diversity of different staff members from the schools. Is that right?
And schools got to choose who was on them. I
Okay.
think one of the things we've talked about at our level is maybe giving more guidance into some other people they might be able to bring into that coalition. Some of them use their leadership team, others of them involve community, like you heard Mr. Stein talk about bringing in his community. He probably has some students on it. I think some people have some students on it as well, probably more in the high school level. Some people have teachers on it. Some people did like a who wants to be on it, and then the interest came in, and it's like there were lots of people that wanted to be on it. So some people will tell you that I've got 20 people that came to my first equity coalition meeting. So I think it's done in different people are on it, but we know that it does take a group of people to help decide what to do next with the whole staff.
Yeah, certainly. I think as if we can involve, I guess we want this to feel like an everybody sort of conversation, as opposed to the idea of a teacher saying, "Oh, this is just handed down to me. Here's another item that I've got to do," without really getting the whole understanding of what that conversation really is and why it's important for everybody to be involved in this sort of thing. One thing that I kind of scribbled down too, and maybe it's worth a look. I remember back when I was teaching, we were using the Too Good for Violence as kind of our character curriculum, if you will. And I'm not sure if maybe there's something a little more refreshed out there available for this character education that we're delivering in schools. But maybe that might be worthy of taking a second peek at next time we renew something along those lines. If there's something a little more contemporary dealing with some of the more modern day issues we find in our climate. And that might, probably have some good strategies embedded within it to have some of these tough conversations and to help teachers navigate that, because so these conversations are incredibly difficult and can be very uncomfortable, I think, for folks. And got to be careful to not be polarizing, as you do that. So.
And how do you teach us as facilitators of the conversation to remain neutral, and because our job is to help others have the conversation in schools, not necessarily, become divisive by. It's difficult, right? Like
Sure.
so.
Goodness knows, we certainly hear it from our constituents. I think on both sides, that you're doing too much or you're not doing enough, and you're not going to make everybody happy, and we just have to know we're doing the right thing for kids.
I do go to sleep at night with that thought. I will tell you that. I think in my heart that we are doing the right work. And so as slow as it may seem to some, as fast as it may seem to others, I do think we're making very deliberate, intentional actions to move the work. And like you said, I can't, it's not annual, you're right, it's a great analogy, Mr. Matthias, about we are growing trees, and we're growing like big oaks. I mean, it's not, it's just not easy.
But I wanted to say it's profoundly important work that you've taken on. It's brave and profoundly important, in my opinion. I think if we ever hopefully get to that point where we don't have to look at the numbers, I think that, you know, as we raise up the children that need those extra supports, the educational level will raise as well for everyone. So this is like one of those rising tides raises all boats situations. So we really do need to, I think this is incredibly important work to focus in on what do these children need to succeed, so we can give it to them, so then everyone in the school can succeed. I think it's incredibly important work. So I applaud you for your bravery and your persistence and your clout, your willingness to go forward.
Any other comments? Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mott, it's showtime.
I too just want to say thank you to both of you and to your teams who have, as she said, are very committed to this work. And I want to thank you because I know you have moved us on our compass to a place of action, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you.
Dr. Feldman, may I have a book?
Yes.
Oh.
I didn't have room in hand it.
I already have one.
I didn't get one.
I didn't get one. If you could give one to Natalie for me.
Sure.
I can give you some back. Dr. Feldman, I can give you some.
There we go. I have 2 audit reports to present to the school board today. The first one is the internal accounts audit for 2019-2020, and the second report will be live stream contract audit. Next slide, please. Jump right to the internal accounts audit. The audit covered, as the title shows, July 21st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. The total internal funds during this period of time was 40 schools and 2 centers. My work for this is I worked side by side with the senior accounting specialist on site for 10 schools, and then I did 5 at my desk as additional, and of course the senior accounting specialist performed the audits at all schools. And I did a little bit more work at the Grassy Lakes only because of the situation there, where she filled in to finalize the work for the year end. So discussions with her, I felt I should do the majority of the audit work on that particular school, since she was involved with closing out the paperwork. Next slide, please. Here's a quick snapshot of where the funds are. As you can see, at the top left-hand corner is the prior year, 2018-2019, and the bottom right is the current year. And you can see there's not much change in the distribution of funds. The high schools still hold about 60% of the funds. Elementary schools sit in a little over 20%, and the middle schools 19, well, last year 19, this year about 17%. Next slide. This is in the audit report. This is kind of the breakdown. The first one is for the high school and the middle schools. And I just draw your attention to the fact that there's, you know, out of all these high schools, 9 high schools and 10 middle schools, which total 19 schools, there was only 14 findings in our audit work. And if you want to look at the 2 schools that had the most findings, Lake Success Academy and Carver Middle School, I'll just show you, and it shows in the attached paperwork there that they were both new bookkeepers, so they're in the learning curve process of doing the paperwork. So they represented 50% of the audit findings in the schools. Next slide. Next is the elementary schools. Again, I'll draw your attention to the bottom totals. And Grassy Lake Elementary School was the one that had the funds that were missing. And we did have, the bookkeeper had some medical issues. Paperwork was way behind. We were communicating with the principal about that. And then finally, as the year end closed, we obviously the accounting specialist went in there and helped close out the books for the year. And that's where we did find some missing funds. The other three, if you look at Groveland with 5 findings, Triangle Elementary School with 9 findings, and Umatilla with 6 findings. Groveland and Triangle were both new bookkeepers, and Umatilla, we attribute the fact that they had a little bit more findings than we would like is that the bookkeeper has a lot of other assignments tasked to her, so she spread, we like to say she spread a little thin probably, and in turn probably that's why we saw the uptick in the findings there. So these 4 elementary schools represent 30 of the 43 findings, or 70%. So you can see right there that things are fairly well along. So as far as the conclusion goes, I talked through most of these. One of the things I guess I'd point out is the very last bullet point on this slide, and that is, I think in the past 2 or 3 audits, I've recommended that the schools continue forward with implementing RevTrack, and we now have all the high schools on. We have all but 1 middle school and about half the elementary schools. One of the things that came up was with COVID, the pandemic that we had last year. If you remember, we had to return funds. Things like the proms weren't done, grad bash, trips weren't made. So in turn, refunds had to be made back to those that paid those funds. Those that were on RevTrack found this as a 2-step process. I mean, it was literally go in, select the students, select the funds that had to be returned, click the button, and the funds were returned. Schools that did not do RevTrack, I mean, if you want, I'll read through. It's a manual process where they set up a spreadsheet for each of the students. They had to go in and find each of the accounts for the refunds. They had to contact the branch to have them get the funds. So, you know, you need so many 20s, 10s, 5s, so they had all that. It's kind of like placing an order for your money. Then take the check down with the SRO to accompany them, because a lot of them were coming back with $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. Then they had to divide those funds up into envelopes, mark the name of the student on the envelope. Then they had to send out communication to the parents, or those that were going to come in to collect the funds. Then they had to set up a fund table system where the person would come in, show their ID, they check it off, you know, everybody signed forms, so that we had the verification that the funds were returned, and they were returned to the proper person, so that if anybody came back and said they didn't get their money, we would have that. Then we had to follow up with those that didn't pick up the funds. So this is, I mean, you can already hear, I mean, I'm not even done yet. I mean, there's still more steps. And today they're still working, some of these schools are still working on trying to find the folks to get funds returned to them. And then the last step will be, if they can't get these funds back, they'll have to put them on unclaimed property. So those that went through this manual process and are still going through it today, RevTrack saved these other schools just a tremendous amount of time, effort, and they're done. So, and it printed out the report. The report was signed by the principal, reviewed and signed by the principal. So I just wanted to say RevTrack is, and will save these schools a tremendous amount of money over time. And hopefully we don't have too many more pandemics to go through.
Why are they not, why isn't everyone on it then?
It's a choice. I mean, they're
It's the school
given
budget, right?
Yeah.
The schools would have to make the choice, and it would
Yeah,
come out of their
and I
budget.
think some, I mean, have brought up the point where, you know, there is the uptick, you know, for fund, that we do not want to pay the cost of the funds coming through RevTrack. So in turn, it's a little bit higher fee for the parents. Does that make sense? So, you know, where if you cut
How
it.
much more?
I think it's like a 3%.
3.61% you'll pay as a parent
Yeah, it's
in
like
addition
3%.
to every transaction we make.
Right. And on the back end, then on the back end, Mr. Mathias, the refund, there was a fee, but the schools decided to weigh that cost. And it's more than, as you can see through the manual process, it was more than worth it to take that fee internally and pay it.
It's more than worth it, but that amount seems really, really high. I
At 3%?
3.61.
And that's where I've said I'm surprised that we can't shop around a little bit. You know, I just remember when we were and collecting things through PayPal for the PAC. You know, people would pay like 8% or less than that to make a contribution for that. And here we're sitting in schools paying 3.61% for, you know, there's just got to be a more budget-friendly platform. I can speak, you know, from multiple kids in school. That adds up over the course of the year. I totaled one year. I'm like, oh my gosh, I paid like $100 in fees just trying to pay for field trips. You know, so I think that's the drawback. But the ease is certainly nice because you have a very easy record that you've paid for it. You don't have to worry about sending your kid with, you know, $100 to go pay for something.
Yeah, and on the front end, we save where the teachers aren't collecting funds. The bookkeeper doesn't have to count all the money and to take it to the bank. So there's a lot of things that we're saving internally because of that. So,
But are there how difficult would it be for you to look at different people that do the same thing?
Other vendors.
I think that's a
it can be
district
done.
thing, isn't it?
I mean, would you like that task done? I mean, I'm sure there's other. I don't know who they are, but I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, I would like to see if part of this report is if we could see what some options are and what percentages they charge, right?
Part of this one or is separate? I mean, we don't want to hold this up wide.
Based on your recommendation,
Yeah.
I would like to know if there's other, so I don't know if you want to use
Yeah, I
this
don't
as
know.
the impetus, but you're endorsing this rev track, which I see all the benefits.
Yeah,
But when you say 3.61% for families, that seems really high to me. I mean, as a transactional fee, that's all.
Yeah.
So,
I know
and
we
maybe
don't.
it isn't.
My kids are same, not the same system, but a different system, and it's fairly close. I'd have to go look exactly see what the same percentage was, but I think it's fairly close. But
There seem like there are so many methods now to send money electronically. There's got to be a
I
better
know,
deal
like
out there
Venmo.
for the consumer that still provides the ease of accountability and.
yeah. And we have to make sure it integrates with our system too, though. Just otherwise, we're not solving anything.
Okay, so without a whole lot more conversation about this, that's the reason I'm asking you to look at it.
Okay,
Okay?
understand.
Is Mr. Mock the person to look at it? Or is that a district, like, procurement job?
Well, he's
Chairman
very
Matthias,
familiar
this
with I don't know. Go ahead.
Chairman Matthias, this is Scott Ward. It's a little bit misleading to think that it's just a transactional fee. There's a lot more that's provided than just a transaction. This is a company that not only integrates with our system, but it also integrates all of our school stores. So it has the online component too. So when the parent goes in and orders from the school store, they're already on a RevTrack platform. So it's more than just the financial transaction that the parent's paying for. So the cost would be for the school if you went with a different platform. Not only would you have the financial fee platform, but you'd also have to pay for the online stores and everything else that are set up for the schools.
But, so Scott, this is really in your wheelhouse. And is this the only company that integrates with our system?
There are two other companies, but this was by far the cheaper one, the less expensive.
As a transactional fee?
Yes, sir.
Well, what about as a transactional fee, if it's saving us money in time and accountability, could we lower it to the parents?
That is an option that the board could decide to do, yes.
I'd like to look at that option.
I guess the big question is what that would cost. I mean, I guess the internal accounts are collecting, well, just the internal accounts are collecting this, what, millions of dollars every year.
$5 to $6 million.
So 1%. So even if you lowered it 1% for the parents,
Not all that's coming from parents. Some of it's grant money, and I mean, it's a mixture of a lot of stuff.
I guess I'd be interested in how much money has gone through RevTrack in the past year.
That would be the tool to look at.
And do you know how much that is, Scott, spontaneously?
No, sir, not spontaneously, I do not.
I do not know.
Can we do a follow-up on this then and look at that?
Yeah, let's cost this out.
Yeah.
But the other piece of that question that I'm not understanding exactly is why some schools would go collect cash to return to people as opposed to writing the checks. Okay, so
they were. I guess it depends on how the money came in. I mean,
but like,
Why would you ever run to the bank and get
I don't know.
enough money that you needed a SRO to escort you in.
Because we're talking $20,000 or $30,000 that you're carrying back.
That's what they do.
All
Wow.
in this little envelopes. Okay, so but now the bizarre. So once again, experience, because I got a lot of kids in a lot of different levels in a lot of different schools. As they were getting some money back, like some kid would get a check for their field trip, and then this other kid, I had to pick up an envelope that had $10 in cash back for a banquet that didn't happen. Meanwhile, this other kid got, a check here, and this one. Why? I don't know why instead of cash in those envelopes, it wasn't all checks.
It
Or
depends
mailed to
on,
their house.
it depends on the internal, when the principal sets up the internal account, different internal accounts have different provisions depending on the bank. So it may be that they're charged per check.
Oh, I see.
So if that's the case, then the school might make the decision that it's better to give cash.
Because then they would save the per check fee.
Correct.
Right.
I see.
Plus, also, the school would have to set up each individual student as a vendor to actually generate the check from the system. So if you have 600 students that you need to refund back to, you would have to set up 600 vendors to send the money back.
But didn't you get the money from them that way, or no?
You would receive the money from them, but they're not set up as a
They're
vendor
not set
when
up
you
as a
receive the money from them.
Oh,
It's
so
just a
you can
receipt.
receive money, but you can't return it on this program?
Yeah, you have to
You
set
can,
up the
but you
check
have to set them.
request.
You would have to
That
go
was
back
another
and set
step I
them back
didn't
up for
read off,
vendor.
but-
Yeah.
So if you didn't
I
give
would,
them cash, you have to fill out a check request, and that's what Scott's going through, and then the principal has to sign off the check request, and so.
Just seems to me that there's so much risk of sitting there with $30,000 in envelopes, and
There
I don't
was.
think anyone should be carrying that. That's uncomfortable for that person too.
That's why the SROs were there, I think, through the whole process, even while they were distributing money back to whoever picked it up, the parent or the guardian.
How often does that happen? I mean, we're
Yeah,
talking
this
about
is a
pandemic
one-off
where
thing. I mean, this was
We were
definitely a one-off.
reimbursing like tons of things, and so I just wonder how often do they have to do that?
Yeah, let's hope we don't have pandemics every year.
well, I guess anytime a trip gets canceled, that
Yeah.
for some reason, and they have to refund.
Yeah, and that
Me,
hopefully would
to
be
me,
only
this-
one class or something.
Right, it wouldn't be
versus-
$30,000 to
Wouldn't be,
$50,000 times multiple organizations and activities and clubs and sports
Right.
and.
It kind of seems to me like we should have some sort of standardized process. So like, I'm surprised that we don't use Insight Credit Union for all the schools. You know what I mean? Or some sort of standardized accounting, and then have the program just go into all of the, if everyone's Bank of America, then it would be, I would think, much easier than if every school is a different account. But I guess that's a decision.
That would be something for Scott to answer, why
One
we have
of the
different
main
banks.
reasons is you cannot find a standard bank that would serve all schools. Different cities don't have all of the same bank branches. So, and a lot of it also has to do with the local support that the school's getting from that local branch.
Right.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
That's right.
So,
I have a comment.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you or Mr. Ward is going to do the research on looking at other companies, but when you do, I am concerned about the transaction amount, but I'd also like to know whether the costs are associated with each company, like if there's a setup cost, if there's an upfront cost. I think we need to know that as well as the transactional
Right.
charge.
Amen.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Move on.
The other bullet that we didn't spend much time on, though, and it concerns me, is, so you said one elementary school had a loss of $1,700?
Yes.
I guess, can you tell me more about that piece?
Well,
Like, are these funds that said that they should have been captured somewhere, but they're not there? And
right,
what-
the
at what
funds
point
were
in the
supposed to come in, and when they were reconciling them down, they were not there at the bookkeeper. So the teacher might have collected them, or did collect them, and then they were supposed to be in the bookkeeper's office when we were helping to finalize the paperwork for the year. So we came up with about $1,700.
Did you follow, I guess, the track of that, or is like all $1,700 supposed to have come from one particular place?
It was
added up
many
all over the
different
place?
things. It was many different things, and
So like maybe the teacher was
the
supposed
bookkeeper
to.
was out many times on medical leave, or he'd be out, back in, doing some work, and then going back out again, then coming back in. So it was just one of them unfortunate events that just accumulated over time, and they were, the accounting specialist was communicating with the principal. I believe Mr. Ward knew about it as well. I mean, we were trying to get things, or they were trying to get things caught up and fixed, but, you know, the year end came.
So what sort of protocols have we put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen on a larger scale? Or
Well, we have training. I mean, that's the main thing you can do is each year the accounting specialist runs 2 training classes. I think one in December and one during the summer, about June timeframe. I mean, that's the best you can do is continually train.
But at the end of the day, if what I'm hearing is $1,700 is legitimately missing,
Mm-hmm. It was not accounted for, yes, so it would be missing.
okay.
Well, our procedure, well, Mr. Mathias, our procedures are oversight. I mean, because we don't have
No, I get
separation
you.
of duties
It's-
down at that level, so it becomes the principal or the designee of the principal to
Right,
make
I know.
sure that the daily paperwork is
I
kept up.
understand, you're merely auditing and bringing the information to us.
Yes,
And now then, that we know that $1,700 at the end of the day was missing, then what was done about it?
That person resigned, right?
yes.
The bookkeeper resigned.
Yeah, and then normally you try to collect is the process.
From the bookkeeper.
Correct.
So the bookkeeper took the money.
We-
Do we know that?
That's the assumption at the end of the day. It's not there.
Oh, wait a minute, we don't know that.
we don't.
Okay.
I guess
Okay,
if you
got it.
Okay.
Okay.
So they have a new bookkeeper, and they're.
Have we launched an investigation?
Don't think we have launched an investigation. I don't think you would, I don't think the police department in that area would do it for $1,700.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it fair to say we followed the established protocol?
They did
That
not.
we followed the established protocol for things that happen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, next.
Okay. Next audit is the live stream contract audit that the board asked me to do. When I got into, when I asked for the contract, I found out that there was actually 2 contracts with LifeStream, one with the exceptional student education and one with student services. My objectives for the audit were to assure that the services in the contracts were being provided as outlined, and that the costs as outlined were also being paid for accordingly. So I looked also for, during the audit for areas of opportunities for improvement that we could implement to strengthen the procedures, drive efficiencies, and/or lower costs in it. Next slide, I'll talk about the exceptional student education contract first. This contract was for special programs of education and therapeutic services. It's completed at 2 facilities, one in Eustis down the street here, and one up the street in Leesburg. Attendance at the 2 locations is a total of 120 students, and this is managed by the ESE department. They manage the students coming in and out of those 2 facilities here at Lake County Schools. We do have policies and procedures that ESE follows for the students that go to those 2 facilities. The contract price is fixed, and the contract also provides transportation for the students and the fees. Findings, LifeStream invoices I noted were not pre-numbered. Also, I noted where the attendance is below on, they give monthly, they keep track of the monthly attendance, and I noticed that on average it was below 120 each month. It's 10 months out of the year. I also looked at the FTE funding for the Lake Academy, and that came in at roughly 112 students. And the transportation records did not provide detail for auditing purposes. Next slide. One of the things I guess the main thing I'd point out from this is the contract's fixed. So we contracted for $2,651,400 for the schooling of the 120 students. Transportation for the 120 students runs at $409,536. So we have a little over $3 million contract with them. So if you divide that into the 120 students, you get an annual cost per student of $25,507.80. Looking at the FTE, because that's where our funding's coming from for helping provide the dollars for this, of the 100, we had roughly 112. It's actually 111.883. We're getting $15,237.65 for a level 254 student. So that gives us about $1.7 million. So the difference is the school district is making up the difference of $1.35 million for this particular contract. And I think that kind of parallels a little bit with what they presented as well. So,
Mr. Mock?
Yes.
I just want to clarify that funding is not the funding for, like, we've given extra funding to Livestream for help with extra counseling and other services like that.
That'll be
so
the
this
next.
is
That's the next contract.
okay. So this is specifically the contract for those children. I just wanted to be clear, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. So the next contract is with the student services contract with Livestream, and that's for mental health services to Lake County Schools, to provide clinical coordinator for the mental health and wellness activities, for training services for parents, families, and/or school personnel, and also counseling services to the Lake County School students. I didn't put in the dollars for that, but those services total out to $270,000 in that contract. In this case, the clinical coordinator we're paying the $60,000 salaries and benefits for that particular position. For training, we're providing up to $10,000 for training services that they would provide, and $200,000 for the counseling services. So next slide, or last slide. Once again, we have where the invoices are not pre-numbered, and in this particular, under this particular contract, I found where two of the training invoices were actually billed twice, and we actually paid them twice, totaling $300. The student services has requested credit and received credit back for those two duplicate invoices, and the recommendation is obviously that the Livestream provide pre-numbered invoices. So that we don't use dating. Is usually what they do is when an invoice doesn't have a date, a number, they fall back to the date. So there's no way to actually, if you're using the date, you can use dates over and over again, and you don't have the ability to catch a pre-numbered. So, questions?
Well, I have the concern of the cost per children at the 120 kids at $25,000.
Yes.
I know these are special needs children, but that's almost twice the cost of Lake County's most expensive or more.
And under
expensive
this year's contract, it went up 4%.
schools. Right. So are these kids getting such a remarkable education that it's that much above what, like, an expensive private school around here
That wouldn't
provides?
the audits.
You know, I mean, this is a significant contract for a very small amount of kids. Could we in Lake County do better? Because we had talked at, like, what, 2 years ago about the Lake Success Academy going down to elementary and middle.
Yes, so this has been a topic of conversation for the past couple of years about how do we provide the highest quality services and do so at a reasonable cost. That was one of the reasons why we were able to move our 45-day placement students over to Late Success, which was a tremendous cost savings for the district. So that was kind of step one. We are continuing to work with Livestream to reduce the cost of this contract and looking for alternatives moving forward.
I think one of the areas, because this is about 6 years that I've been concerned about how much we're spending with those folks. I know, Superintendent, you've done a lot of work negotiating a more equitable position, but this lump sum, like set contract and not adjusting to FTE just makes no sense to me. Now, from their perspectives, they got to have the teacher regardless.
Right. They've got costs.
And I think that the disadvantage they have is when it comes to educating our kids is that we have the resources, they don't. And I don't understand why they have objected to us handling the academic part and them handling the mental health part and doing what you're best at. That's my opinion about it.
That was some of the conversation I got involved in with those at ESE too. They like to have they would, I think, like to have the teaching part, right? They said we're better at the teaching, or they feel that.
We are better.
Yes.
Well, that's because that's what we like to do. Yes. Yes.
So yes, I think they're the big issue or the big hurdle would be where to educate, right? We don't have the
Space has
land
been
or
a
the
challenge
buildings
for
or
us, yes.
Well,
the space to do it.
and the reality is, when you look at these kind of dollars that they're receiving additional funding, that it looks more like a dollar grab than what's best for our kids. That's what it looks like to me.
So that's where my recommendation came in, to move forward with planning on how we could potentially move forward to bring in-house and share that mental health responsibility.
Brilliant.
With them.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments? All right, thank you. Very good. Hey, excuse me, Tom, I do have a comment. Have you and Mr. Yoakum organized your next meeting date?
Yes.
Okay.
Send it out today.
Okay, good.
February
Okay, board
25th.
members, again, we want to reinforce that our appointees participate.
Yes, February 25th will be the next
Who-
audit committee
Who
meeting.
sends out those notices of the meetings? Because my person told me she was not notified of the last meeting.
Chloe? I talked to Chloe.
She didn't attend the last meeting, though,
She
right?
did. She was at the
Well, the
last
one
meeting.
okay. She called me about, I guess you had a set schedule, and she called me wanting to know if there was going to be a meeting.
No. Mr. Yoakum proposed doing a set schedule.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And
yeah,
that.
okay.
Maybe that's what confused her, because she did call me.
It was, that went back because I had talked to Mr. Yoakum that really their committee needed to sort that out
Okay.
before it was brought to the board.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's why this next is going to have
Okay.
some organizational component to it.
Okay, so if you
Yes.
spoke to her, that's fine.
Yeah. Everything's
I
good.
haven't spoke to her since Mr. Yoakum's letter went out, but I thought you meant before the last meeting.
All I want to do is make sure that each of the representatives are contacted, and either you're doing Zoom and personal, right?
We haven't got the Zoom yet. I'm wondering how we can do Zoom, because we have to do it in here, so.
Being Sunshine, they've got the same struggle that we've got.
Yeah,
Right.
On the voting piece and taking action, right?
Yeah, where are, any update on that? Nope. Okay.
I couldn't hear. Was there no
He
update?
said the Attorney General hasn't responded, but we're doing it by way of making an initial statement and then.
Yeah.
And then moving
But
forward
it's
with our
based on
meetings.
but it's based on a specific medical concern, right? It's not just that they want to Zoom into the meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
But if someone had a medical
So we can use
condition,
that, yes.
Should we
Yes.
make arrangements?
Probably.
If we're trying to get an entire committee together, right?
Probably.
And that Zoom can only happen in here?
No,
Right,
once we can. We'd have to have 3 physical.
right.
So you have, those people have to be in the same place, I guess, but you could Zoom in, if you had a computer in here, other people could Zoom into the meeting as long as they could hear everybody.
Does that help you?
I'm hoping to Zoom in the gentleman from Carl's Riggs in Ingram to do his presentation at that audit committee meeting. So he should be fine.
Not voting or not.
Yeah, he's not a voting yet.
So the only thing that you need to do is make sure that the person makes a statement on the record of
Okay.
why they are there, why they're not there via
First, I have
Zoom.
to have 3 here.
And you have to have 3 here.
Yes.
That's your key.
Okay.
Okay? Anyway, y'all need to have a vibrant conversation is where I'm going with this.
Yes.
On y'all's structure
Yes.
and whatnot, okay?
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good work.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to board member comments. Dr. Burns, we'll start with you.
Okay. Just so I don't forget, for Natalie, for the naming committee, she asked me to announce that I had chosen Lori Baxley for the naming committee. I think she'll be great. I made a Facebook post, and I felt like I couldn't be as straightforward as I wanted to. Basically, the CDC has come out and said that schools, when you do appropriate mitigation measures, and the recommendation is that the outside community would have lower amounts of COVID than we do, and therefore it is safe to open schools. I posted that it was safe and that we were seeing the same thing as the CDC was saying, and that we were seeing very low numbers of spread within our schools that are about at the level of the community or lower. So I just wanted to clarify, your definition of safe may be different from my definition of safe, or the CDC's definition of safe, because there was a fair bit of pushback, but I did want to go over the measures that we are taking to protect our students in the schools, and that just includes the hand sanitizer, mandatory masks, disinfectants on desks. They have upgraded the filters in the air conditioning systems. They're working on upgrading the air conditioning systems. We have assigned seats. There are very few field trips this year. We're trying to reduce as much spread throughout the school as we can. We are quarantining with our own people so that quarantines do occur in our schools, which I think is one of the key things. So I wanted to encourage teachers that all of this is working. We are seeing lower levels of spread in our schools than in the general community, but we do have higher level of spread in the community. So safety is your decision as a parent. Like, that's your choice. Right now I'm still choosing to keep my kids at home. Other parents are choosing to put their kids in school. That's a personal decision based on your own personal home situation. But I did want to clarify all of the things that we are doing and that we are seeing good results right now in the schools. And I also wanted to let teachers know that when we do see an issue that we can reduce like the stress of, I know it's like a big pain in the rear to wash hands 20 times a day with 15, little kids or 25 little kids. But like, for example, the quarantines, we were on top of that. I was talking in advance about that to the professors at UF. As soon as the CDC gave us clearance, we reduced quarantine from 14 to 10 days. So I also want to let you know that I don't think this board has any intention to make anything harder than necessary. We just want to keep the school system safe. So that's really all I had to say. I just wanted to clarify, because sometimes you just can't explain everything in a Facebook post. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burns, and thanks, as always, staying on top of this. Mr. Dodd?
Yes, so for the naming committee, I have chosen Vin Montori as my appointee, who brings a great wealth of corporate experience in the world of sponsorships, as well as from the perspective here as a Lake County Schools employee who can ensure that we're selecting folks who are truly leaving their mark and exemplified great leadership. So I think he'll be valuable. And the only other note I'd like to share is just a big thank you to the Educational Foundation for the Teacher of the Year celebration and their innovation and trying to do it safely and still make everybody feel special. I enjoyed afterwards looking through various Facebook posts to see all the remote celebrations that were occurring and how schools were helping their teachers feel special and honored in that night. So that's it.
Well, I don't have a lot. I'd like to again thank both our presenters today for the workshop on equity. I thought it was very well done. Also, as always, Mr. Mock, we appreciate your efforts. And I too enjoyed the Teacher of the Year celebration, and I guess that's about it.
Good deal. And I'll just say ditto to both of y'all. Superintendent?
I'll say ditto as well, and just take this opportunity to say thank you to all of our school counselors. This is National School Counseling Week, and certainly they play an absolutely critical role